So let me, let me move on to our session on regulatory systems. And it's, of course, a very important one when it comes to bringing together the conversations we've had this morning on how building healthcare systems and design. To invite up our very distinguished panel for this, starting with Mr. Sudhansh Pant, who's the Joint Secretary at the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers at the Department of Pharmaceuticals for the Government of India. So we're very honored to have you with us. Please come on up. Thank you very much, sir. We also have Dr. Anjay Riche, who's the Health Systems and Products Director for Health and Food Safety DG at the European Commission. Thank you, sir. And Professor Guido Rassi is the Principal Advisor in charge of Strategy at the European Medicines Agency. Come on up, sir. Please, grab a seat, sir. So let me start perhaps with Mr. Pant, who can give us a very interesting perspective from the government of India, because of course up to now a lot of the discussions have been looking at the hospital sectors, looking at how things are financed at the NGO sectors and so on. So let's see how the government of India is now moving forward. And I guess the first thing I would ask you is just to give us some idea, especially with the change of government that has occurred, what direction India's government is taking when it comes to designing a more sustainable, long-term health system built around the idea of perhaps universal health care. Please try, it should be on.
Thank you, Riz, and welcome to all the participants. Healthcare in India has always been a great challenge. The size of the country, the population, the spread of the population, the density in some areas or the lack of it in other areas. So it's always a great challenge to make healthcare services reach to the last citizen in this country. But the Government of India has accepted that challenge and is now working on a draft new health policy, which is there in the public domain. Later on, I'll run through the brief highlights of that policy, the proposed policy, which aims to increase the percentage spent on healthcare, as well as several initiatives in making healthcare more accessible, affordable, and better delivery to the last citizen of this country. On the regulatory aspects, there's a lot of work going on at present. There is a draft amendment bill for the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. It has been proposed to be renamed as the Drugs, Medical Devices and Cosmetics Act, recognizing for the first time that medical devices is also a very important segment now of our industry, of our regulatory setup, which merits different attention. There are many progressive steps in this draft legislation which would be put up to Parliament shortly. And apart from this, there are also provisions for clinical investigations, for simplifying or for making the process of clinical investigation easier in the country, something which had run into some problems over the last few years because of certain pronouncements. And apart from this, the regulation is also in terms of price regulation and the prices of medicines, and also in terms of certain marketing regulations, in terms of ethical marketing practices which the Indian companies are expected to follow. So in a brief, these are the 2 or 3 regulatory reforms which are going on at present, and later on I would be giving out more details on these. Thank you.
So just while we have you, I might follow up with a quick question. One of the key concerns that has come up in the morning debate is the amount of money that's committed to healthcare issues. India's spending relatively, in GDP terms, is very low. And the advice, for example, from one person we spoke with was there should be no kind of cap on healthcare spending because it's something that needs to grow organically with its needs. And as soon as a framework with a cap on spending is put into place, suddenly it limits what can be done and may restrict the application of universal healthcare with really a sustainable model.
That is correct. Presently, as GDP spend, our healthcare expenditure is very low. In the new draft health policy which is there, it is proposed to be more than doubled. And as I said, this draft policy is still in the public domain. We are still getting inputs from all stakeholders. And as and when we go ahead with the formulation of this policy, definitely all viewpoints would be taken into consideration.
Sir, I thank you very much. What I will do is I will now ask our other panelists to give you their presentations on this perspective, and perhaps Dr. Rish can start first. I think you have a short presentation, sir.
Prepare a few slides, just to help us with the discussion at this stage. Oops, doesn't go this way. Okay, let's try. I mean, the first issue about the European Union is to understand, how this system was built, and this is the map, and with the calendar, how European Union started, in 1957 with funding member, there were a very small group of 6 member states, and gradually was growing. And I was lucky enough to be part of the history because the time I was as a Vice Minister of Health in Polish government, also joined the negotiators team which was preparing the Polish accession to the EU. And when we discussed the regulatory issue, I think it was an interesting observation this time when I was in government, that we face, as a Polish legislators, terribly difficult questions, how we can accept and adopt, the thousands of pages of regulations the European Union wanted us to get through before we access to this club. But at the same time, we understood that it's better to be in the club than be outside this club. So it was a good motivation. But also we understood that it's better to learn from the relatively experienced legislative system, regulatory system, and get the best to our own system. So there are 2 lessons I would like to pass from this. And maybe last lessons as a politician this time, I learned that was about decentralization. And today morning we were told that India is having this dilemma, how much power of the healthcare to give to states. And frankly speaking, as one who was also working in the local government, and finally the Polish case, we did decentralized system, and our regions in Polish case, they got the power to manage the health systems, not pay because this is given to the insurance fund, but they're managing it. They took a lot of responsibility, and this brought a lot of innovation to the system, and also a lot of accountability, which you were calling, and transparency as well. So I think we made a continued discussion about how to decentralize or not decentralize system, but this is, I think, very, very interesting dilemma. The other interesting message I'd like to pass about the important question about GDP percentage and public-private expenditures. Europe is not unique in this discussion. In one hand, we have countries, going back to the country I know best, Poland. We started with not just with a smaller GDP in dollars or rupees term, but also we started for the relatively lower expenditures in health. Today, Poland is having 6.7% of GDP spent on health. It's growing. At the same time, we have also relatively high, but not the highest in percentage in Europe, expenditures from out of pocket. This is also a tricky way how you measure this private expenditures, because again, the difficulties is, for example, about, we call them differently. In some countries, you say this is under a table. In other countries, say the grace fair payments. In other system, you will say simply corruption. So anyhow, there are money in the health systems. It's very difficult to trace and catch and really put it into the national statistics. We have the system in Europe, again, European system, which is trying to develop methodology together with OECD to catch those numbers. Sorry, going upside down. The third message I would like to pass is about the legal system, because I think it's also important to when you would like to understand European Union. We have the treaty, which is the kind of constitution of European Union. The current treaty is called Lisbon Treaty. Usually the names are coming from the places the treaty was signed. The last one was signed in Lisbon. And in one hand, we have the public health chapter, which is obliging us to do job, especially in the number of kind of typical public health provisions. For example, in the health threats field, like how we can work together to fight with pandemics or infection diseases. But in other territory, we have so-called internal market legislation, which basically allow to movement of people, goods, capital. And pharma medical device regulation is under this. So when you develop the product in country, Poland, you can easily export to a country like UK. Of course, there are special provisions how to do it, but if you follow them, you are there. Same for doctors, qualification, nurses, pharmacists. When you are trained in one country, you can easily practice in other countries. So this is the free movement of people. But also we have the directive with e-commerce, which is very interesting, I think, for Indian audience and possible businesses in the future. You can provide also services via internet, including the medical services, but it's complicated but possible. And then finally, we have standardization, the European standardization system, which is very important, for example, in the area of mHealth, e-health. And finally, slides about the why we do things. In health systems, European Union was not structured to work on health system as such, but because there were two major drivers. One was the economic crisis, when governments were under pressure to basically show accounts to the European system, because we have also European currency, which is important one to preserve. And so we got the right to have a look on those accounts and understand better how you spend money. And health is relatively high expenditure on accounts, is up to 14% of the public expenditures in the European member states. And the second important case, which I think is very unique, not maybe for Europe, is interesting to understand in Indian system, there are patients who went to the court, European court, and claimed they have a right to do things the way they believe the things should be done, or the services should be given to them. And the court said, okay, this is a prescription, and you legislators, you have to establish the system which allowed patients to exercise those freedoms. And this is how we came to the directive of cross-border healthcare, which basically allowed today patients to go to one country to other and get treatment. Again, there are some limits, there are restrictions, there are ways to do it, but this is important that patients got those rights, and it would be interesting for me to understand, if it's something we can also learn. Interesting discussion with already today about the patient satisfaction, the quality of healthcare. This other important agenda, because again, the quality of healthcare, patient safety, you can see also as a threat. So when patients move from one place to other, from one country to hospital, also can be badly treated and can be even more sick simply. So all these things run the EU action plan in patient safety. Other important development was, again, links to the discussion about the effectiveness healthcare, how we measure our products, our technologies on market. And this is about the European cooperation in the health technology assessment. It was very divided to member states, and since few years we are trying to bring together, streamline. This is again the lessons from Europe. Often things started, separately in few member states, and then slowly they are building up as a one system. And I finish with two examples. One is the regulatory framework for medicinous products. It basically started also from the kind of member states and then brought to the EU system. So we develop single market for pharmaceuticals. It's very tricky when you study this carefully because we have one market, but when you go deeper to the system, you understand that because of pricing reimbursement, we have 28 different markets from the market point of view, but for the authorization and pharmacovigilance is one market. And this allowed us simply to make the products available to our patients. And then you have the number of regulations, which I think Guido will explain, when we discuss this. But in the area of medical products, we have special directives for blood, tissue, cells, medical devices. We have standard from GMP, newest directive for advanced therapy or clinical trials. So there are many developments. And finally, the last development already was the issue was referred to by previous speaker, medical devices framework, which again is a very interesting example for India and Europe to learn together, because we learn a lot from the current regulatory system. We are revising our regulatory system, building new system, and I think it will be very interesting. We'll discuss this maybe tomorrow, after tomorrow, with Indian colleagues, what kind of lessons we can pass to Indian regulators and work together. And finally, the last message of my presentation is the way we should go on international cooperation. In the medical products, we are not India, we are not EU, we are not US. It's a global system today, and it's important that we all join efforts to bring together our international cooperation. And of course, India is an important partner and should play an important role in this respect. Thank you.
I would call on Professor Guido Rossi for his presentation as well, sir, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Well, just to try to go directly into the topic, I think the need for a convergence has been in some way addressed and clarified this morning. However, I think it's worthwhile to summarize why there is this need. Well, we know that the nature of the medicine, both manufacture, development, and research, is becoming global. The movement of clinical trial is moving globally, and the increase of the complexity of the supply chain all over the world, not confined to Europe, raises basically an issue about the global capacity and capability of coping with this complexity, with the capacity building issues and beyond. Also, but meanwhile we are trying to cope with this problem and we are trying to find the common ways and common approaches. We already have emerging science which are giving us even more challenges, because emerging science basically will be using different methods to generate evidence, which will generate additional challenge for us to do in a harmonized way. And of course, that's open also opportunities for patients and once again, new challenges for health system to be carried out. Basically, we moved from the time of the harmonization, where basically ICH, as Andreas already mentioned, has been quite successful, at least for GMP, GCP, ADR. Some 60 guideline has been issued on this harmonization. We had to move in the next level, the level of convergence, because now we are dealing with the way we assess the medicine, the way we evaluate the medicine, and the way we establish the benefit risk in different jurisdictions. And when we come to different conclusions, we know how much of distrust is generated. So, and we are moving beyond the convergence. Now we have to move in the work sharing, in the capacity building, in the cooperation from bilateral, multilateral, up to the coalitions. What can be one of the binding element? What could be one element to aggregate and to foster this to happen? Probably is regulatory science. You might wonder why regulatory science can foster this. Well, first, science is universal by nature, and that's therefore is better placed to foster a global, some global achievement. Second, just to try to give to regulatory science a definition, I think regulatory science is something that encompasses some range of science, like from basic, clinic, statistic, up to social sciences, aimed basically to address complex systems and to foster development of new evaluation tool for new methods to generate evidence. And happy to expand on this if you are interested in that with some concrete operative example. And as a conclusion to this, I think that a new paradigm that to develop medicine is coming, and therefore a new way to evaluate and new methods to determine the benefit risk and beyond the risk effectiveness, the effectiveness of the medicine is coming. New clinical trial design need to be detected, to be identified, to address a subset of population, and also how to entail all the new technology, new science, from the apps to the big data, to the real world data, even more important, to the social media. So all these things together, I think, belong to the regulatory science, and to address the future and to converge with the present, I think if we build together from scratch, will be much easier and much more likely to come to this convergence. Or maybe we don't need to converge because we will build the same as of scratch. Thank you.
Ladies and gents, I would invite you straight away to put up your hands if you have any questions regarding the issue of regulatory systems, and tap into the wealth of experience we have here on stage. Just put your hands up clearly and we'll get questions to them. In the meantime, I would follow up a little bit and ask perhaps Mr. Pant first. When it comes to looking for models, when you look at the kind of reforms and the changes that are taking place in India and these proposed changes, what sort of guidelines have you sought? What kind of areas have you examined in order to find potentially workable models for India? Where have been the best resources located? If you prefer, yes, sir.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we are in the midst of having a lot of reforms in the various regulations concerning the healthcare sector in India. The first and foremost is the legislative reform which is in process, which is underway. Second one is the pricing reform. The third one, as I mentioned, was the marketing, the ethical marketing reform. So before I address Riz's question about what are the resources we draw upon to formulate these changes or these reforms, I would briefly like to first share with the audience today what are the major reforms we are proposing, because I feel that at least some idea, very briefly, I will share them with you. In the legislative reforms, which is our main a mainstay, the main regulatory law which we have in the country, which is called the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So very major changes have been proposed already. They were in the public domain for more than a month. A lot of suggestions were received from various stakeholders, institutions, bodies, individuals, civil society, from everyone. And thereafter, some refining was done, some suggestions were taken on board. And now finally, it is at a stage where after due approvals, it will be put up for as a bill for the approval of Parliament. Now, first and foremost, this at present it is a draft amendment bill. It proposes to rename the existing act as from the Drugs, Cosmetics and Medical Devices Act, from the Drugs and Cosmetics Act to the Drugs, Medical Devices and Cosmetics Act. So the very name itself is undergoing a change as a recognition of the importance which medical devices have in today's healthcare sector. Then many new definitions have been proposed in this act which were earlier not there, and some of these definitions, there will be 46 definitions in this act as against the existing 10. And some of the things which have been defined for the first time, they will be clinical investigation, investigational medical devices, medical device, predicate device, notified bodies, medical device testing centers, medical devices officers. The inspectors will now be called officers. Inspector somehow has a slightly negative connotation in our context, because inspector means somebody who will go there and probably harass, or maybe not a very friendly name. So it's been renamed as an officer, medical device officer, in place of the drug inspector. Then there will be a clinical trial protocol which has been defined. The ethics committee is there, investigational new veterinary drugs, investigational new drugs, etc. So what I'm saying is a lot new terms have been defined which were not there in the earlier act, and because a lot new things have been incorporated in this act. Then there is a whole section which is devoted to clinical trial of drugs and safety evaluation of cosmetics, and these have been included in a chapter, and this will deal with the regulation of clinical trials of drugs and cosmetics, medical management and compensation in case of death or injury. In fact, this is one area where because of certain unfortunate incidents some years back, the entire clinical trial industry had to suffer in the sense that a lot of new stringent regulations came up. So this is an effort to streamline those regulations, to make them more industry friendly, while at the same time protecting the interests of the patient. The functions and responsibilities of the ethics committee have been defined. The penalty for conduct of trials without permission or in contravention of rules and regulations, and some other penalties. Then there's separate provision for safety evaluation, etc. So in the clinical trials investigation segment, a whole new features have been introduced. Then there have been designated medical device testing centers. There will be a medical devices technical advisory board, and as was mentioned in the EU presentation, classification of medical devices also on the basis of risk. The higher risk, there will be 4 categories according to risk: high risk, medium risk, low risk, and very low risk. And there will be correspondingly there will be different standards for their testing and approvals. Then there'll be standards for medical devices, and there'll be the role of notified bodies. I'm not going into too many details, otherwise it might not, it'll become too technical. Then the different authorities who've been given the powers, have been proposed, this is all proposals I'm talking about. For the import and manufacturing of medical devices, it is the CDSCO, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, which is the central regulator. And for the sale and distribution, it is the state authorities. So for the more stringent, more important part, which is the import manufacturing, it is with the central regulator, and for just the sale and the marketing, sale and distribution approvals, it is for the state regulators. Because India, being a federal country, has a very strong network of both central and state drug regulators, who will now also be medical device regulators. Then it has also been proposed that there will be good manufacturing practices requirements which will be defined, and there will be a vigilance program, and certain reforms which have taken place already over the last 1 year or so. In the case of cosmetics, is that prohibition of testing of cosmetics on animals, this has already been implemented, it is in force. Likewise, prohibition of import of cosmetics tested on animals, even this has been implemented over the last year or so. Permission for relabeling or stickering on the label of imported cosmetics, this has also been allowed. And mandatory registration provisions have been introduced. These four are with regard to cosmetics. These are some actions which have already been notified. They are already in force as on now. The earlier ones were the proposed changes in our legislation. And also some when the main act gets amended, along with it the rules also have to be amended in some way. So some of the proposed changes which have been which are there in the which are likely to get amended in the rules, they are regarding the amendment to qualification of technical staff involved in the manufacturing of devices. Then there will be specific labeling provisions for both the local market and exports. These provisions are being inserted or amended. Then it is proposed to provide for exemption for custom-made devices. It is also proposed to have standards for medical devices and to prescribe the shelf life for devices. Many of these things are presently not there in the Indian legislation. So if this legislation goes through, it will be a major landmark, and it will be a great and a progressive step for towards not only regulating the so far largely unregulated medical devices sector, but in also streamlining the very important clinical investigation sector in the country. So these I just ran through some of these proposed changes which are due. And now coming to Riz's question about where do we draw all these things. So some of it is, of course, we follow the best international practices. We also try and see what the other national regulators are doing of other countries. And of course, the Indian context also has to be kept in the picture. And then when these things go in the public domain, it's all done very transparently. Then we get opinions from, it's placed on the website for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then a whole lot of opinions come, a whole lot of suggestions come from all stakeholders. So it's a very, what should I say, a very democratic, very consultative process, so that keeping in mind the specificities of the Indian market, of the Indian population, the Indian context, then we work on it and then come out with a proposed legislation which we feel would be in the best interest of the country. So that's how we go about it.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, again, let's open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please do raise your hands clearly and we'll get the microphone to you. Dr. Tiwari is at the front here, please. Oh, no, sorry, and you had your hand as well? We'll come to you in a moment, yeah. So. Go ahead, sir.
My question is from Mr. Pant. I am Dr. Ashish Tiwari. I am an allopathic doctor based in Mumbai. Previous and current government has allowed Ayurvedic doctors to go for post-graduation in gynecology, surgery, radiology and many other faculties. So are we not playing with the quality of care? How can we allow these Ayurvedic doctors to perform hysterectomy, MTP, hernia hydrocele operations? And what is your policy? Are you going to restrict these doctors or you are allowing these doctors?
I'm not aware of the issue which you have raised, so I don't deal with it, but I will refer it to my colleague in the health ministry who will be perhaps able to shed some light on it, or maybe
it is going on in many states. Ayurveda doctors are getting post-graduation through government.
As I said, I'm not aware of it, so I won't be able to respond.
Okay. Thank you, sir. No, but what we can do is perhaps look, and I can ask my existing panelists, my other panelists as well, the Professor and Dr. Rish as well, what your view is on how, as some call alternative, some call complementary medicines can be woven into the main healthcare system, and what degree of separation there might be based on qualification, experience, and the tasks those people perform. Professor, perhaps, this is something we touched on earlier, but you could give me your view on this. Whether people with Ayurvedic or homeopathic skills can be mainstreamed.
Well, in Europe, of course, we have some regulation for herbal medicine, for so-called alternative medicine product. Of course, that is pretty much run at the national level. We have some sort of centralized approach to grant at least quality. That's on quality we have quite a robust program. How to incorporate other medicine there would be quite challenging, because I think we have to, I think what was very well captured this morning from some other panelists, we have to generate evidence, and I think the mainstream should be what we are calling exactly the regulatory science, and we have, I think, to follow common line to evaluate whatever kind of medicine and whatever kind of therapeutical option with an agreed methodology, and to generate evidence with a sound methodology. That could be the only way that we can integrate different
I think there are two separate factors here too. One is, I think, the funding and financing of that kind of alternative and complementary medical system. And I think what Dr. Tiwari is referring to is how people with those particular qualifications are being given mainstream tasks which doctors in the allopathic field have been trained specifically for. Dr. Rish.
Maybe I can explain, from experience, because I have to meet time to time with people representing European Ayurvedic associations or homeopathic or other type of alternative medicines. And I think there's a big tension between those doctors. They decide, often they are licensed as MDs, by different medical schools in Europe. We don't have kind of separate training for them, but they decide to go for the kind of alternative, let's say, training.
So they're actually medically trained in the
They're medically trained conventionally, but then they go for the. But also we have those they start to practice, for example, Chinese medicines, because they learn from they just graduate of college or without any medical background. So this is first problem in our kind of European countries. We don't deal with this issue on the EU level. So far, this is not harmonized, so we don't have system that somebody got training in one country and can transfer to others. Some countries, like UK, for example, are trying hard to find the way to bring those doctors or practitioners into the system. We have, for example, there would be interesting experience with acupuncture. In some countries, in relatively many countries, this is reimbursed by insurance system, but only in the pain treatment. It's not for example, reimbursed in asthma or diabetes treatment. It's not recognized. It's practiced often by neurologists or anesthesiologists. They learn how to do acupuncture, and there are also licensing system for this. But also we have very, very aggressive even moments, debates between the doctors' associations and doctors. They practice homeopathic medicines. They are used in the European system, so you can produce them in France, but you can sell them in Polish market, and they are accessible to patients. But of course, you can see also the kind of aggression from, especially in those countries, they don't have traditional way of using, because, for example, France or Germany, Austria, the homeopathic medicine is used there. My wife is French, so she easily is going to this type of medicines. In my Polish family, nobody even think, that you can use homeopathic medicine. So it's also very much rooted in the culture. I think Italy, for example, homeopathic is also very unknown a little.
Actually, I think in the US, I think with some of the complementary medicines like chiropractic treatments and so on, they have a complementary kind of base, and you get a certain amount refunded and so on.
Yeah, but also speaking about culture, back to French and Polish case, if my wife has a pain, in the back pain, she goes to chiropractitioners. I take the pill.
No. Thank you. There was a lady with a hand up there. There you go. Thanks. Keep your hands up clearly if you have a question, and I'll get the microphone to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Himangi Bhardwaj, and I'm the Senior Health Advisor for the British High Commission. So I'm talking almost on the behalf of, say, the UK's regulator, MHRA, as well as industry. And this is almost a request rather than a question to Mr. Pant. First of all, it's extremely positive to see the government coming out and actually discussing openly amendments to legislation, etc. And I must congratulate you on that. Secondly, at the recently concluded Global Exhibition on Services, there was a session on life sciences and pharmaceutical sector, which was chaired by Secretary, Department of Pharmaceuticals. And we were invited to comment on what are the challenges in this sector in the regulatory space. So may I please request that you create not a new body, but almost a task force that can work across CDSEO, Ministry of Health, and Department of Pharmaceuticals, so that for a foreign regulator, say MHRA from UK, or for UK companies, it's easier to feed in our inputs rather than having to discuss this with different organizations within different ministries, because currently what happens is that the process is very difficult. It's almost, and you would know this, MHRA has been working with CDSEO on capacity building and skills for inspectors, and also easier systems of inspections, and how do you almost translate this at an international level. But it would be far, far easier for us to feed in if there was one seamless system across these three ministries.
Thank you. Actually, in fact, Mr. Pant, this is one of the things that came up earlier, is that it is hard to navigate the various areas of healthcare because so many responsibilities are spread across so many ministries, and that perhaps there should be one kind of centralized area that people can go to, which someone jokingly called the mother of all ministries. But
yes, ma'am, thank you for your suggestion. And we are aware of this problem, and Riz also mentioned the work of pharmaceuticals or healthcare in the country is shared between 3 or 4 different departments or ministries, with each having its separate mandate. So I can understand the felt need for a seamless kind of a system. On this, I would just like to share with the audience that about 4 or 5 months back, there were 3 task forces which were constituted. And these were interministerial task forces which had representations from, they were all headed by the Secretary of Pharmaceuticals, and they had representations from Ministry of Health, Ministry of Commerce, Department of Industrial Policy Promotion, and also the industry associations were all represented on it. So one was on how to promote manufacturing of medical devices in the country. Second task force was on, first one has already submitted its report. The second one was on how to further encourage or enable the private sector industry in the country. And this task force also has had, we've had all the meetings and the report is under finalization. And the third task force is on identifying the various gaps in the medical verticals which we have in the country. And then suggesting steps to fill in those gaps which may exist in several critical verticals, therapeutic segment wise. So in these task forces also, the one which has already submitted its recommendations, second one in which the recommendations are being finalized, there is provisions have been made for such a kind of probably structure which you are suggesting. A core group or a committee of secretaries has been proposed. So when all 3-4 sit down together at regular intervals, maybe once a month, once in 2 months, depending on the seriousness of the issue before them. So then I think these so-called interdepartmental issues, the interdepartmental coordination issues will get sorted out. So that is the purpose. But your suggestion is very well taken. On the regulatory front specifically, we can also think in terms of having a multi-departmental approach. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rassi, if I could turn to you and just look at some of the things you'd mentioned in your presentation. And one of the things, obviously, you looked at developments in other markets. I wonder how easily it is to transfer some of the lessons learned, some of the information you've gathered, and apply it to India. How valid is that?
Thank you. I think this is one of the most important issues. First, India is becoming, if not one of the already one of the major players in the pharmaceuticals. So we definitely need to have a more unified approach, more harmonized approach. How we can transfer? I think there are at least 2 good experience to transfer. One is to start as early as possible with at a very operational level. We are engaging with other regulators on a regular basis on cluster of issue like pediatric, like orphan designation, like inspection, like standards and so far and so on. And the daily basis work, it was one of the key elements to build the mutual, let's call mutual trust, mutual reliance. Second, to start to have, we are willing to participate in always in a coalition. We are fostering coalitions. And I think if India will join that kind of experience, that will be something that close to what we have done in Europe to build on the mutual trust among us. I think that will be terribly important.
And actually, I want to get Dr. Rish's view on that as well. The idea that what has been learnt outside obviously has to be tailored for a market like India, but what needs to be done here in order to be able to transfer those skill sets and information? What should India do to prepare itself to get that kind of transition?
I can also use experience again from my time in the government of Poland. The first development we were kind of forced by the new joining EU was to basically build an institution which is simply able to cooperate with the European Medicine Agency. It was the Polish Agency of Medicines, which basically started almost from blank page because we had some developments. There were a few people working on this, more disasters than solution this time. So everybody was a little bit afraid to even touch these bad things. But slowly, one government, we started this journey, the next government slowed down, the other one speed up. So finally, we were able to build an institution, which is today one you can see in the European family. So this would be my first kind of advice from experience. Of course, we know that the Indian government is already investing in the drug control office and development and putting money and FTs on the jobs and so on. So this is the first institution. Today morning somebody said, we have good people. I think it was Professor Brand who said, you have people, but you need institution to stabilize the system. Second advice is, I think it's good to be this international stream, in the sense that the best way to get kind of lessons, as you rightly said, is to basically go to different countries, get something from the US system, from European, from Chinese, whatever is popping up. But of course, to do it, you need to interact with those systems. And my lessons learned is also that, if you don't interact, you don't see what your neighbor is doing, simply like this. So this will be my second advice, and the last advice will be about people. I mean, we really see the more and more professionalization in this field. I mean, we had the same problem in Europe. We try also to push a kind of academia, research networks to be more professional in the regulatory science field, in the field of medicines or medical devices, even more difficult, because this area which is very rapidly growing up, and then almost every week I am confronted with a question. Basically, Guido already referred, how to catch up with the scientific development, the way the regulation is not going to kill, but at the same time is going to save, patients' lives. So we have to be carefully balance, risk-benefit.
Actually, you lead on to exactly. I wanted to bring in Ranjana Smetacek of the Organization of Pharmaceutical Producers of India on this issue of how to balance that regulation. So as Dr. Ish has just said, that there is a regulatory framework that allows protection of patients and a structured response to any needs within the country's healthcare system, and yet leaves enough room for, if you like, the more free market enterprise aspects of healthcare, which can allow it to develop, innovate, and grow in an organic and kind of responsive way to market trends.
Thanks, Riz. So I think, as Mr. Pant mentioned, I think clearly government is seized of the challenges of our complex regulatory systems, which lie across several ministries, several departments, and so on. In fact, there's actually an additional level of complexity with the center and the states, because being a state subject to healthcare, and obviously I'm more closely related with pharmaceuticals, but I think there is that juggling act to do as well. And my own sense, and I'll turn it over to, maybe Mr. Pant has a comment, my own sense would be that really this has to be driven from the center. I would say even perhaps from, the center level of ministries. And I remember being at a different forum, and I said, what is government going to do? And there was this whole debate about who is government. Is it the PMO? Is it this ministry? Is it the person at the state level, and so on? So I think that clarity, and I'm really, again, one of the objectives I know of a forum like this was to just seeing the parallels with Europe, because if each of your member countries are treated as a state, and also learning from what you all have done, things that have worked well, things that haven't worked well, so that I think you used the term this morning, so that we can leapfrog. We don't have to be sort of hindered by doing something which has failed somewhere else, or we can immediately get the benefit of something that's worked somewhere else. So I mean, that would be my thing. I think I would love to see priority, the kind of priority where people at the center, I'm for want of a better thing, let me say the Prime Minister's office, somebody at that level would take it. Of course, we were encouraged by hearing the Minister of Chemicals and Fertilizers say that we are hoping for, he had earlier said that talking about a ministry of pharmaceuticals and so on. But I think this kind of, I know people have started talking about this and thinking about it, and maybe it will come to pass.
Actually, and perhaps Mr. Sudhanshu, I can turn to you on this issue. You'd recognized earlier that there is a need for kind of reform in the way responsibilities are managed. And I just want to get your take on this idea that there could be a more focused, centralized direction, but perhaps a devolution for states to act based on a very strong centralized mandate. Is that likely? Is that a very likely prospect?
In the health regulatory system, there is a central regulator, and then there are state regulators, and their roles are quite well defined and demarcated. Occasionally, it happens, like it happened with what we call the FDC, the fixed drug combinations. In that case, it so happened that some state regulators, they kind of encroached on the turf of the central regulator. There was some issue between the central and state regulators. But by and large, despite state regulators, central regulators being there, by and large, they respect each other's turf. Occasionally, there might be some infringement somewhere, maybe either because of misinformation, maybe because some other reasons, but by and large, roles are very well defined. The central regulator has taken some proactive measures to even smoothen out these areas of potential difference which may have existed. Central regulator is also now on a very ambitious program of expanding, not only in terms of numbers. So far, numbers are, as compared to some of the regulators in the more developed markets, our numbers are still very less. And in strengthening the technical level of the officers, there are trainings which are supported by US FDA, by MHRA and other regulatory bodies of the world. Even I think EU might be supporting some trainings, I'm not fully aware of it. And then a very big program on computerization of the entire system, making all applications online, deposit of fee, application fee and other fee online, granting approvals online, and all other things, be it with respect to grant of marketing approvals or manufacturing licenses or clinical investigations. All the things will be online after some time. So it's a very massive overhaul taking place, and a computerization project is currently being undertaken by the central regulator. So central regulator is being supported in a big way, and they are making themselves more strong and more in sync with the other regulators in the advanced markets of the world. And state regulators still have the problem of manpower and technical expertise. And the states have all been requested time and again. Again, it's a continuous process. Some states are taking on to these reforms much faster than some others. So it's a continuous process of improvement. Central regulator has taken it upon himself, and they're also supporting the state regulators in some way. So potential areas of conflict, there are very few. Some where there have been differences in the past, they are now being resolved. So more or less, roles and duties are quite well demarcated.
Thank you, sir. And, Dr. Rishi, you wanted to add something to this?
Just to, because you two interesting interventions on the floor. In one hand, we can, as I already said, in the morning session, that we can see that the role of regulators is seen in the government as an important one. There's the Korean case when the head of Korean FDA is a member of the cabinet. So it's a decision of President Park. So this is as such, importance of this system in Korea. In other situation, this is European situation that we have relatively strong European system with a head of agency working in the Commission, so basically in the European level. But we should not forget on the state level, we have important agencies like the one you mentioned, the British agency or German or French. they are in the network which is supporting the central level. So for example, when you said about the states, so of course the question is, can states develop the capacity that can support also central level at the way that it makes sense? Because the European lesson is also that because of this network we are able to have almost 5,000 scientists available to work together. And of course, it's easier to work with somebody who is in Mumbai and doesn't need to work in Delhi, but still provide, the scientific expertise.
The two-way street is important.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see the also way to kind of interlink the central and level with the state level. And maybe last point also is better leave states, for example, the issue like licensing of pharmacies following the incidence of falsified medicines, some there, but at the same time, for example, the European pharmacovigilance system, which was established just a few years ago, finally, we have signals developed locally, but there's a central strong database which allowed monitoring and final decision, if something goes wrong or we have to change direction.
Okay. Professor Angela.
In most cases, when we think of regulatory frameworks, we think of the hard law, and then it applies only in case of safety and of risk. And I think one could
sorry, are you just saying so it's restricted mostly to safety at the moment? Is that what?
No, there's only in Europe a basis for hard law if there are safety issues or risk. And we have a lot of situations where that is not so the case. And that's why I like a lot a European model, also the best practices or guidance and to freedom or open method of coordination was before to give the implementation phase some corridors of freedom, how to implement, to benchmark to each other, etc. And I think that these soft laws can be also very strong. And because you said that in the before we are in a very dynamic field, and so there I think that might be really the best way in the moment. And when it comes to EMA, for example, with adaptive licensing now, I think that is a way to look for more flexible frameworks, and I think that is something what I really like in Europe also to try that out. And the other is what also André mentioned, the possibility that even people can go to court and to get their right, and that was a momentum of the cross-border directive, a proactive policy making, and so I think there are also issues where countries where there's a huge discrepancy to the framework European, their possibilities.
So that actually, if I could go to Professor Rassi on this, what Professor Brandt raised there is an interesting thing. The idea of flexible frameworks, but where perhaps the discrepancies are within certain parameters, they don't allow the system to get too chaotic. How there can be flexibility within a kind of regulatory framework without it being so loose that really there's no consistency. How from what you know of Europe, how can or how would you advise India to start setting up a framework that gives it that flexibility without being too restricted? Is there any particular formula?
Well, we have to define what we mean for flexibility. Okay. I think we have to start to agree on standard, and that could be not to reinvent the wheel, to use just ICH and standard already existing, and that I think is the key building block. Then the consistency will be get by working together and mirroring some existing standards.
A quick follow-up, Professor. So, early on when we were talking, I remember some of the earlier panelists saying that Europe's system is not perfect in itself. There's many things that need to evolve there. How quickly are you seeing the European system evolve to improve some of the frameworks there, so that when people are adopting existing frameworks, they're not getting kind of a faulty system in the first place. They're getting something that has been evolved.
Well, I think European system, we have to see what is good and what is not. There is something very good, which means for the basic, the key standard of quality, safety, we are there. It's very robust. It's very well accepted. There is no controversial. It is the approval, the central approval benefit risk still is not controversial. With one approval, you get in the market. Where the differences started to come, and has been very well addressed this morning, is basically when you come to a pricing and sustainability issue. There where the Europe that joined in the first phase now have to find a consistency in the next phase, accessibility and sustainability. The regulatory system in Europe do not foresee any implication in the evaluation of the price and in the value of the medicine. Of course, this is not anymore sustainable, and we have to see how we can interact to the next level. But the problem in Europe is the next level. It's not the level of the basic level of quality and stability and efficacy.
Okay. Mr. Pand, if I may touch on something, you said that India's got this fairly progressive plan to move forward in terms of spending on healthcare. It's going to double the amount available. One of the earlier participants had mentioned that the thing with India's spending on healthcare is so far there have been large inefficiencies. And I wonder, speaking to the areas with which you're familiar as well, how those efficiencies might be improved so that the money that does go in has a greater impact. I mean, there seems to be scope for impact just by increasing the efficiencies too.
The provision, what we look for as the percentage of GDP, that is just the government provisioning, the government provision in the budget. The Indian health scenario is very much different from that of many other countries, primarily on two things. Number one, our out-of-pocket expense on healthcare is proportionately very high. And secondly, the share of private expenditure as different from government expenditure is also very high. That's why if we just look at our GDP spend in isolation, that just represents the amount which the government is spending on healthcare. Of course, in the smaller places, the villages, the hundreds and thousands of villages of this country, there may not be any private medical assistance. There will be only maybe a medical sub-center of the state government. Inefficiencies are in a remote area where maybe a small village of 100 persons, one medical personnel has been posted there by the government. He or she will be commuting every day from her place, her village. The chances of her belonging to that small village are very remote. So in all probability, she would be commuting from the district headquarters or maybe the subdivisional headquarters and reaching that village. And she will be spending 3 to 4 hours in that village. Sometimes she may not even attend. So that group of 100 people are, supposing she's not there, she doesn't go for 5-6 days, then they're absolutely without any healthcare assistance. Of course, at a sub-center, the kind of assistance you'll get will be a very basic assistance. For the next level, you have to move to what we call in our setup a PHC, a primary health center, and then there is a CHC and so on, then there's a district hospital. It's an entire chain. Now, and the second striking aspect about the Indian healthcare scenario is that the penetration of health insurance is very low, as opposed to some developed countries, Western countries, where health insurance might be covering a majority of the population, more than 50%. In some cases, even 80 to 90% coverage of health insurance there. In India, exact statistics I don't have, but I think it is less than 20%. It is probably more in the range of 10 to 12%. So, recognizing this large gap, Government of India has recently announced in the budget that for a large majority of the population, when we look at India, we have to look at those millions and millions of people who are probably surviving on the on maybe $2 to $5 a day, that kind of subsistence level. and not just at the middle and upper middle classes and all. So a very ambitious program of providing health cover, health security, health insurance to millions and millions of Indians has been announced in this year's budget by the finance minister, and the scheme will probably roll out in the future. And then the aim is that those people who are not able to access any public healthcare facility, who cannot afford even a private healthcare facility, so where do they go? So this health insurance scheme, which will probably cover millions of Indians, will provide them that strength, will provide them that means by which, if the public health delivery system is not present or is inadequate in that particular area, they can always access the private healthcare system, which at present is totally out of reach for them because of its unaffordability. So this single step, I think, would increase the healthcare coverage and accessibility to a very large extent. In the government setup, there are, of course, the problems of infrastructure are there, of manpower are there. Today in the country, there are millions of healthcare workers at every level. But yet, there are a large number of vacancies also. The biggest challenge today is that even doctors or highly qualified people, they are not willing to serve in the rural or semi-urban areas because of so many factors, education of their children. These are practical issues. They don't find decent accommodation and they don't want to keep their families there. So if areas which still constitute 70% of our country, 70% is still rural and semi-urban. So if our medical health professionals are unwilling to serve in 70% of the country, then it becomes a very big challenge to take public health care to those levels. And government doctors are not there. Even private qualified doctors will find it very difficult to live in those villages or small urban towns of maybe 5,000 population, 10,000 population. And that is the real challenge. So there have been many attempts in the past. It's a continuous process, giving them more incentives to stay, giving them some hard duty allowance or something on those lines. So it's a very, very complex, India is a very complex situation, very complex challenges are there. But of course, all the time the efforts are there to overcome these challenges, and I'm sure that we should not just look at that 1.5% or 1.2% of GDP in isolation. There are so many other ways in which the government facilitates, even in some cases, even there are projects of PPP, public-private partnerships in healthcare. So those provisions are not counted for in the GDP provisions in the budget. So there are so many other things, and just taking that figure in isolation, I feel is not the right way to look at it.
I wasn't, when I used that as a reference point, I was referring to how the government has a commitment, obviously, to increase things, but I was wondering overall, and you answered that, the issue of efficiencies and the challenges faced. Perhaps in the remaining minutes, I could ask each of you to, Mr. Pant, obviously it's going to be a bit easier with your experience here, but perhaps Professor and Dr. Ish, I can ask you to, if you could see a 10-year scenario, 10 years from now, an ideal situation, how far India could come, should come with the right kind of steps, what would you see as the picture 10 years from now in India if the healthcare reforms and structuring are on track? What would you envisage happening, sir? The kind of changes?
Well, I can see that certainly India will be one of the major contributor to whatever decision we have to take, because it's already a major player. I see that as soon as India will start to be engaged, will be up to speed very fast, because they demonstrated to be able to reach quality and to build facilities, top-notch plants. So I see a full integration in 10 years.
within 10 years?
Yeah, I'm completely optimistic about it.
Thanks. And Dr. Ish?
I love this question because yesterday when I arrived first time in India, as I told you, I spent 7 months here 30 years ago. And 30 years, I can tell you, India was in Delhi because so far I have since see Delhi, it was different. I don't know if we need 10 years or maybe more, but you see those changes. But I will give an example which I think is the best I can memorize from my trip this time. I went to Bangalore this time when I was just shocked 30 years ago. They built the Science Museum, which I visited, just earlier, the German Science Museum, and I thought, ooh, it's a great. But when I came to Bangalore, it was really great, well designed, a lot of good stories to teach, students and visitors. And this time Bangalore was not Bangalore today, it was just starting the history of New Bangalore. And I think it's exactly showing the dynamic of this country. So I really share with Guido's point that if the dynamic is here and the regulatory framework will be, in one hand, well designed, taking into account all possible scenario with the flexibility built in. Also, I think there was a call for the kind of one life science approach, which I think also that today the borderline between the medicines, medical devices, even cosmetics, also the tissues and cells, biotechnology is so difficult to define, and often we simply believe this is more and more one science is most probably if we should also fit this regulatory approach. So if India can really grab this momentum and I close my eyes and thinking again, maybe it's a moment that you build your new science museum as Bangalore did 30 years ago. And maybe 10 years from now, or even 20 years from now, you will be like IT sector is today in India. I wish you this because I really believe, that there is, everything is, all ingredients you have. And you told me, this was my last lesson from India. One day I remember I was couldn't understand some logic of Indian politics this time. And we were just sitting with one of my Indian friends, and he told me, we are like a hand, every finger is separate, but if you like to get the grasp of rice, better use your full hand. So I think I wish you do this together.
Thank you, Dr. Ish. And taking into account the electioneering period is over, give me a realistic 10-year scenario, Mr. Pant. Where do we see the healthcare system 10 years from
now? I would definitely hope to see that 10 years hence, proper effective healthcare should be available to every Indian citizen, which is going to be a big challenge, as I said, with so much of diversity and complexities and distances and populations and all that, and the income levels. We'll have to devise innovative means of making healthcare reach to every citizen. The private sector will have a major role to play. Government, of course, will put in its best resources, but then it will have its own constraints and limitations. The heartening news is that the Indian pharma industry, the Indian medical device industry, the private industry, the Indian hospitals, private hospital industry, they are doing very well. Even in the global context, they're doing very well. So that provides hope that the private sector would also come up in a big way to meet the challenges of meeting the healthcare needs of every citizen of this country. This health insurance coverage scheme of the Government of India, at a very, I think it's a 1 rupee premium or something, it's subsidized, highly subsidized. The initial response to this scheme or the initial implementation of this scheme would also, in a very big way, shape the future of the healthcare services in the country. If this insurance scheme really hits the target and if it is successful, then we will see a proliferation of private facilities even in smaller semi-urban and rural areas, because then even a person who today is not able to afford, he does not have enough money in his pocket to go to a private facility, he will be covered by insurance and he will get that support from the government. So there are many streams on which we'll have to work simultaneously. The government will have to be there, the private sector will also have to scale up its efforts, and then the industry also, of course, it's doing very well, but then if it keeps up the pace of its growth, like pharma industry growing on an average of 10 to 12% consistently over the last few years. So all these things, if they happen in tandem, then definitely we can see a much healthier and accessible scenario for the country 10 years hence, and I'm very optimistic about it.
Mr. Pant, thank you very much. Well, ladies and gents, please a round of applause for our panelists.